Welcome into an all-new betting preview for this week's Mexico Open. I'm Rick Game, and that right there, Andy Lack. And Andy, full field, individual play, kind of back to the bread and butter, but you were all over the team event last week.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I would say that I'm tentatively excited for Mexico. I think that this is a stretch in the golf season where it's kind of a natural rest spot for a lot of the game's top players. I really admire Jon Rahm coming back and defending his title. I think the fact that it's in a Spanish speaking country is part of that as well. And so at least we get some stars, and kind of the narrative this week is generally to Rahm or not to Rahm.
Yeah, we will ask that question and hopefully answer it here in a couple of minutes. But let's talk about this golf course, Vidanta Vallarta, which really, Andy, in its current format, with this field, we've only seen it once before. It was last year. It's not necessarily your typical, when you think of Mexico, we usually go to El Camaleon and we're at altitude and there's a lot of different factors there. So what do we have to compare and contrast to Vidanta Vallarta?
Well, we have 1 year of data, which is probably too small of a sample size to draw any broad conclusions. But what we can draw from that 1 year of data is that for me, when I did my breakdown, this is one of the most distance biased courses on the PGA Tour. Now, I'm not breaking any news there. I think everybody knows that. You can take a quick glance down the leaderboard and see that in the top six, you all had Jon Rahm, Tony Finau, Kurt Kitayama, Cameron Champ. All of those guys hit the ball a very long way. But this is a golf course where the greatest defense is its pure length. This was designed as a resort course by Greg Norman. And basically, when a tour event was coming to be held here, they looked at the golf course and said, well, I think the only thing that we can really do is just beef up the distance and change some of these par fives to par fours. So, it's pretty wide open off the tee. The greens are relatively flat and slow. The greenside surrounds are really easy. It's one of the easiest courses to get up and down from if you miss a green, right? So it's really just about can you hit the ball a long way, and are you a fairly solid long iron player? And I thought the leaderboard reflected that pretty accurately last year.
Yeah, even if you're just looking through the scorecard here, you can see there's a short par four, 297 yards. The par threes are, three of them are over 195. But the length of some of these par fours is not usually what we see on the PGA Tour. There's a 498, a 520, a 496. There's another one here somewhere 505. I mean, that's driver and then whatever you hit 200 yards into these greens.
Right. And I think it was on average the longest, if not one of the longest approach shot distances coming into these greens. There's upwards of 35% of approach shots last year came from over 200 yards. So, it's always important to be careful when the pendulum could swing too far. Right. I think in DraftKings, from that perspective, there will be an interesting opportunity on some of the guys that don't hit the ball a long way, right? Because like I said, I'm not breaking any news with this narrative. This is definitely, from what I've seen and heard, become an industry-wide narrative at this point. So there are going to be some players that hit the ball a long way that will actually be way more popular than, maybe they should be, just because of that one specific skill set. And I'm sure that we'll talk about that when we run through one and done options and ownership in that sense as well.
All right, well, we'll get to that towards the end of the show, but here is the betting board for the outright market. This is Odds Checker, so you can compare across the different books that you may or may not have access to and get yourself the best number available. And that question, to Rahm or not to Rahm, is because he is right now plus 275. I saw him open at plus 280. He was plus 350 when he won this event last year. So he is very much in a tier of his own, Andy. Let's just start there. What are the scenarios in which you should be laying some money down on Jon Rahm, and what are the scenarios in which you should not be?
Well, I guess I'll start with the case for him. From a statistical standpoint, he is by far, it's not even close, the best player in this field. And if you want to talk about pure odds and value, Jon Rahm is entering this tournament at essentially the same odds that he was entering last year's Mexico Open in what I would call an actually weaker field. And he's a much better player now. He's in far better form entering this tournament, this Mexico Open, than he was last year. And I think he has to deal with 5 top 100 officially ranked golfers in the world. So I would actually suggest that the field is weaker this time around. You don't have Kurt Kitayamas and Patrick Reeds and guys like that to deal with this time around. It's basically Finau. And then you start getting into the Wyndham Clark, Gary Woodland, Patrick Rogers, Mav McNeely tier, right? So the case for him is that you could probably actually make an argument that there is value on his betting number based on what his betting number was last year at this tournament and the form that he's coming in. The case against him is that there are 143 other golfers in the field.
Right.
This is a golf course that does a decent job of separating elite tee to green play from moderate tee to green play, but it's not a golf course like Augusta National. It's not a golf course like Bay Hill, even or Torrey Pines or Riviera, where Jon Rahm's advantage because of his elite ball striking and long iron play gets us accentuated that much over the field. This is still the type of golf course where if Joseph Bramlett or Luke Less gain 5 strokes putting, they'll be right there. I mean, lest we not forget, Cameron Champ had this tournament it completely in his hands. Tony Finau seemed like he did at one point. Brandon Wu, Alex Smalley, all of these guys, like Rahm did not win in runaway fashion last year. It was very close coming down the stretch. So, you know, the case against him is the case like every single other tournament, why you wouldn't want to lay that much on a favorite, especially on a golf course where, you know, it does seem like if somebody catches a hot putter, they do stand a chance to defeat him.
I also think that to Rahm or not to Rahm is generally answered by what your goals are, right? So Tom had a question here about creating a betting card for each week, and I have a video on that, and we can talk about it a little bit. But I think because we are so in the weeds, Andy, we kind of overestimate the number of people who are going to wager this week and who are going to do it with a predefined betting card that fits the constraints that they have applied beforehand, and they stick to it and they track the results. We probably overestimate those people. If you're just a casual bettor who wants something to root for on Saturday and Sunday, there's like no better option than Jon Rahm. And any player at any tournament, Rahm at this one would be like your most likely sweat coming into the weekends. But I think we generally overestimate those who are building out cards.
Right. And if you still bet Jon Rahm this week at whatever number, plus 275, plus 250, 300, you're still getting a better payout than if you bet any single one of the basketball games on the spread this weekend. Like there's still, you know, you could still make the case that you are in for a decent sweat. I mean, you could make that case for Tony Finau too. Like Tony Finau's at a pretty short number, but 9-1, 10-1 in a field where he is clearly the second best player. And you could probably argue that there is a gap. There's a gap between Rahm and Finau, but there's also a gap between Finau and the third best player, who is, you could make a compelling case for like 6 or 7 different guys. Right. So I'm intrigued by Tony Finau at this golf tournament. Obviously, he was incredible here last year, basically made just as many birdies as Jon Rahm, hit the ball immaculately, actually lost strokes putting, and could, you know, hit the ball struck it just as good as Rahm. And if he had even a neutral putter, probably would have won that tournament over Jon Rahm. So I think there's a compelling case for Finau. I went a little bit farther down, as I typically did, and bet some of these guys that I love that never win golf tournaments.
Yeah, so I've actually not made a bet yet. So I'm still very much trying to figure out what I'm going to do. But that, right. So Rahm, tier of his own, Finau, tier of his own, everybody else. Everybody else starts with Wyndham Clark at 19-1. It includes Gary Woodland at 24, Nikolai Højgaard, and Patrick Rogers at 30. Even if you want to loop in Benny On and Matt McNeely at 35 and 38, this is where you can make a case for the third best player, Andy.
If I was making that case, I would make it for Gary Woodland, who I was able to get a 35 on earlier in the week. That number's long gone. I probably still endorse him, like to, ugh, gosh, the best number now on the odds checker grid is 24, which is a bit tougher for me. But we're still talking about a major champion. We're still talking about a guy who's gained over 4 strokes ball striking in 4 straight starts, not including that 12.5 ball striking at an elevated event, Riviera, right? So Gary Woodland's actually in one of the best ball striking stretches of his entire career. The only issue has been, look at those putting numbers essentially up until last week. And that's what's so encouraging for me about Gary, is that maybe there's some hope, some chance that he found some confidence with the flat stick at the Heritage. And if that is the case, then I think he's absolutely live to win this tournament, because he is absolutely good enough of a ball striker to win this tournament. The putting has just been the missing piece for him.
Yeah, and if you want to speak positives about Gary Woodland's putting, he's like, over the last 3, he's been fine. He's been a positive putter. Even if he putts to a 0, you think he might have a chance around here. He is definitely the guy that I will warm on as the week goes on. I think that when you have to default a little bit to pedigree, right? You know, think about Justin Rose at Pebble Beach. That was basically the 4th weakest field of the year that we've had so far. And Justin Rose, who has won a bunch of events, he's kind of trending into form. He gets himself in the mix, and these guys don't necessarily forget how to win golf tournaments. And I kind of apply that same idea to Gary Woodland. Like, I think if he's in the mix on Sunday against this field, I'm not super worried about him. And I like a lot of what I've seen. And we haven't even really talked about it. You know, if I can convince myself that Paz Palom just wipes away all the putting woes in the world, like, great, here we go, Gary, let's fire him up.
And I mean, think about it. Is there anyone under 45 to 1 outside of Rahm and Finau and Gary that have won a golf tournament on the PGA Tour?
Yeah, so
Benny on has, I guess, right?
So Wyndham Clark, no. Højgaard's got wins worldwide, but on the PGA Tour. Rogers, no. Benny on?
Benny on's won on the PGA Tour. It's been a while though. McNeely, no. Hostler, no. Jaeger, no. Aaron Ryan, no. Alex Noren, I don't actually know if Alex Noren has a PGA Tour win.
I think it's a worldwide win. I don't think it's a PGA Tour win. Grillo won like 2015 Fries.com,
right? Pendrith, no.
But we are, Pendrith, no. Smalley, no. Martin, no. I mean, right. There's like 13 combined wins in this field, and Jon Rahm has 9 of them or something.
Right. Literally. So, you know, you're going to have to get past the, I'm paying a premium on a player that's never won this tournament before. It's just one of those fields where you're going to have to get past that. And you're going to have to look at the numbers and say, okay, I know that this guy's never done it before, but based on my numbers and what my gut is telling me in the course fit, who is the most likely to be a breakthrough candidate, right? And that's the mindset that you have to be in if you're not taking Rahm and Finau at the top of the board.
Ben on, no PGA Tour victories. He has a BMW PGA Championship. He has a Korn Ferry win. He has a Korean Tour win. He has a Challenge Tour win. As far as I can see, he does not have a PGA Tour win.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Let's go deeper. So we talked about some of these names as we get into that next group, but then you start to get into the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which, you know, the argument I think to be made here is 30, just for example, 35 to 1 Benny on. Is he tangibly better than a 65 to 1 Alex Smalley or a 66 to 1 Brandon Wu, or, you know what I mean? Right. Like, I think that the margins are a lot smaller here than we've seen in recent weeks.
Agreed. And you mentioned Alex Smalley, who I really, really like this week. I mean, that's a player that has had a ton of success already at this golf course. I mean, he was right there last year at this golf tournament, gained a ton putting and off the tee. I believe it was either off the tee or approach, but he had a great ball striking week here nonetheless. Been really good just in general on like tropical longer paspalum golf courses. He's had success at Corrales and Puerto Rico. Well, two of the courses that I think are worthy courses to look for in terms of comps, in the sense that they both have similar strengths of field. They both are longer. They both can be wind affected. They both have slow paspalum greens. They're both driver heavy, pretty wide open off the tee. Alex Smalley has already proven in his young career that he has an affinity for these types of setups. So I actually think the 65-1 on Alex Smalley is one of the most fair numbers on the board.
Let me ask you a question. I'm going to try to set you up here. I'm going to try to mold you into an answer that I want. You said this golf course is long.
Mm-hmm.
You said it will require long irons,
Mm-hmm.
approaches from distance, which I generally agree with. What is another golf course on the PGA Tour that you could say that about? Rattle a couple off for me.
Sure. Well, I mentioned Corrales,
Okay.
Cocoa Beach. Those are golf courses that we don't have as much data from, right? So, but I mean, in terms of distance and long iron play, what are the ones that come the most off the top of my head? TPC Craig Ranch, Torrey Pines.
Okay, you can stop there. Torrey Pines. What about Luke List? Right? And I'm not a Luke List guy. I'm not. I really am not. And he's been horrible since that win, which was not this past Farmers. It was the Farmers before. Distance, he still drives it well. Long iron, still there. Can paspalum fix his putting? And if he's in the mix, do I trust him to win? Right? Like he has legitimate winning upside. I think he's 65 or 70-1 is what you can get him at. I'm going to fire a click on Luke List. Not happy about it, but I'll do it.
Yeah, no, I brought his caddy on during the fall swing on my podcast and had a long conversation with his caddy. And he was basically like, Luke is completely turning a corner with his putter. Now, that has not played out. Obviously he was a little bit.
He didn't say which corner he was turning.
Right. That has not played out maybe the way that he was hoping for, the way that we would have expected it. But there have been some signs of life, right? In terms of at least the off the tee is still completely there for him, right? He is still maintained being one of the best drivers of the ball in the entire world. And now he travels to a golf course that essentially is fairly ideal for his specific skill set, right? As you mentioned, as you alluded to, like a lot of the things that you have to do at Torrey Pines, a lot of the things that get rewarded at Torrey Pines are going to get rewarded on this golf course as well. And you're catching a discount on him I think a lot of people, and I like these guys a lot too, like a lot of people will graduate to guys like Will Gordon, guys like Joseph Bramlett, who are maybe in a little bit better form as Luke List, but as you mentioned, don't have the pedigree of winning an event at a big boy golf course in a big boy field, right? And so I think Luke List presents a fairly interesting option in terms of you're getting the skill set at a pretty palatable price and number.
Any other dart throws that you would like to make deeper down the board?
Well, always. I mean, Akshay is intriguing to me. Do I think that Akshay is going to win this golf tournament? I'm not sure if I can get there, although I think there are worse bets on the board to make than him at 110-1. We saw at the Puerto Rico Open, he was right there. Mm-hmm. And take out John Rahm and Tony Finau from this field, and it is the same essentially strength of field. It is an extremely similar golf course, as I've already alluded to. And this is a guy that obviously has a lot of game. He already has probably emerged as a bit of a fan favorite without doing much yet. So he's probably, you could definitely argue based on what he's done, the price is still a little bit inflated, but in these events, I'm always intrigued by the unknown, right? Like, would I rather bet Akshay or Chris Stroud or Ryan Armour, or I'm trying to think of some of the other guys in his price range where we know who they are as golfers. We have years, sometimes decades of evidence of them not winning tournaments, even in these fields. Whereas Akshay, we have a second at the Puerto Rico Open and a couple made cuts on the PGA Tour, not much more. So is there a chance that this guy is just really, really good? Of course there is. And I would rather take my chances on the unknown than I would on a known quantity.
This will officially be the third weakest field of 2023 behind only the Puerto Rico Open and the Corrales Punta Cana Championship. But as you mentioned, Andy, like Rahm and Tony Finau are doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. If they are not in this field, it gets very weak very, very quickly. So it turns into a Punta Cana Championship. It turns into a Puerto Rico Open without those two guys at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I don't think any strategy is wrong this week. If you have a strong conviction on Rahm or Finau, like I said, you can make arguments for there actually being value on their betting numbers. I also don't have any problem if you just want to throw a dart farther down the board.
A little bit of the matchup market here. So this is where you get some deep cuts, right? Because there's the one matchup that is probably going to take on the vast majority of the handle this week, which is Jon Rahm minus 200 to Tony Finau's plus 165. But then after that, it's the deep cuts of a Benyon versus Beau Hossler, a Patrick Rod. I don't mind this at all. Roger, I don't mind laying the minus 144 on Rogers to McNeely. McNeely still looks hurt to me. I know he was injured, and I'm not sure he's super healthy, and this is probably a decent fit for Rogers. But is there anybody that we think is worth targeting for or against in the matchup market?
Nikolai Hochgaard, popular option this week already. I've seen a lot of love for him. I do absolutely prefer his skill set on this golf course to a player like Alex Noren, who's been really all over the map. Honestly, you mentioned the Rogers over McNeely. It's alarming, concerning to me how much my numbers seem to love guys like Patrick Rogers and Wyndham Clark. I do think that needs to be taken a little bit with a grain of salt. Like this is such an extremely weak field, and any semblance of decent recent form, which is what Patrick Rogers and Wyndham Clark have been doing, are going to make them look like and rate out as like the third and fourth best players in the field. But yeah, there's some options farther down the scroll down a little bit farther. Who's Will Gordon matched up against? Ben Martin. Yeah, I like Will Gordon a lot this week. I really do. I think that has a lot of talent and possesses the exact type of skill set that I'm looking for. I would probably lay that minus 120. And then you just get into, I really do like Vincent Norman as like a flyer. I don't know if I want to lay Vincent. I don't know if I want to lay minus 160 on Vincent Norman against like an inanimate object. That's just a lot for, Vincent Norman. But I do think that he is a sleeper that deserves some consideration.
I followed him a lot at Torrey. He got off to a hot start. I think he was like 8 under on Thursday on the North course, and I followed him for a bit, and he absolutely moves it. He just mashes the ball, and he's starting to get a little bit more consistent. Okay, we're going to continue this conversation, talk some one and done, and see what else we can uncover. But first, we're going to take a quick break and hear a word from Andy's podcast.
Andy Lack is one of the nerdiest golf guys that I know, and I mean that as an absolute compliment. His knowledge of course architecture allows him to create some of the most actionable course previews available, and he offers up pure expertise on his own podcast, the Inside Golf Podcast. Twice a week, he offers course breakdowns, DFS, and betting strategy for every PGA Tour event, and he expands the universe by bringing on entertaining and knowledgeable guests who can offer a different viewpoint of the game that we love. Follow Inside Golf Pod on Twitter and download Inside Golf wherever you download podcasts.
Okay, Andy, we are back, and let's talk one and done. I actually think this is a very fascinating one and done week. It's about 1.4 million to the winner. You're very unlikely to use Jon Rahm here. You have to decide whether you're willing to use, if you have him available, a very popular Tony Finau. And then We talked about who the third best player is and how that is up for debate, which gives you a lot of low-owned options if you do not go with Finau or maybe Wyndham Clark. It's interesting.
That's right. I mean, and then you're dropping, assuming that you're not going in the Rahm Finau direction, you're dropping right into the, are you going to play Patrick Rogers? Are you going to play Nikolai Hogard? Are you going to play Gary Woodland, Maverick McNeely, Benny Hahn, Stefan Jaeger? Like all of those guys immediately are like, okay, these are my options. And you're probably not going to be in a situation where you're going to need to use those guys ever again. Wyndham Clark at 21%. That I guess I understand, given the fact that anybody who's running a statistical model this week is probably going to look at Wyndham Clark's numbers and say, okay, he is probably the third best golfer in the field. If it's not Wyndham Clark, you're probably looking at those two of Gary Woodland and Patrick Rogers. Where is Jon Rahm? He's not in the top 10, huh?
Well, he's right there, 5%.
Okay, you're right. Huh. You know, I would imagine, to be honest with you, that Rahm has been used by a lot of people.
Yeah. So I imagine that as well. We've played a lot of elevated events in which he's been hot. We have played a major. We've played the Masters. I will try to pull it up here, but I imagine he is not even available to a pretty significant chunk.
Maybe 50% of leagues, I would guess.
I think it might even be more than that. So
yeah.
Here we go. Let me see if I can just find it real quick. Okay, so Jon Rahm has been used. Let me act like I'm putting a pick in here. Yeah, we're right on it. So he's been used about 53% of the time.
Right. Finau has been used by about
44.
Oh, wow. I would have guessed 25, 30. Okay. That's interesting.
But then everybody else is like 100% available.
So yeah. So I'll ask you this question. We have 3 major championships left and what, 4 or 5, maybe 6 elevated events left. Is there any argument for using Rahm on a purse that is what, half the size of a major championship purse?
Less than that. It's 7.8 or 7.9. A major is going to be 18 or 20. The elevated events are going to be 20. So you're trying to figure out, is Jon Rahm's expected value at plus 275 in a $1.4 million purse higher than Jon Rahm being like 8, 9, or 10 to 1 in a $20 million purse that's going to pay 3.6 the first?
Yeah. Honestly, it's like you almost want it to be, well, if you think about it in terms of odds, he's probably going to be double what he would be at all of those majors and elevated events at least, right? Like he's probably going to go off at 9 to 1, 10 to 1 at pretty much any elevated event too. So I guess you could make the argument that based on his expected win value, there might be a higher correlation of his chance to win more money for you at this event than there would be in terms of his expected win rate at an event where you have all the other best players in the world as well. Yeah. But it's not a conversation with me because I used him, but I just, it's one of those situations where I think it's if you're maybe somewhere closer to the top of the leaderboard and you have Rahm available and you're sitting pretty, you're in the money, you like your position, you still have some golfers left that you haven't used for the major championships, right? It's really hard to win 2 majors in a year. It does feel like Rahm maybe already, so I could see that at 5%. I'm not even in that position because I used him. He might be one of those guys. I think I might have used him at Bay Hill or something silly.
Just as a little bit of a thought exercise, let's say 20% of the time, he wins the 1.4 million. So that's an expected value of 280,000. And let's say 8% of the time he wins 3.6 million, which we can argue, the numbers on that, but 3, 6, That's 288. It's close.
It's close. And that's like fairly like Rahm's win rate. Guys like Rahm and Rory McIlroy over the course of their career win between 7 and 11% of the tournaments that they enter, right? So like in those fields, his win rate is already in the 7-8% range, probably gets bumped up to like 15-20, as you mentioned in this field, right? So but then there are external unquantifiable factors with Rahm. How long is a Masters hangover? You could probably argue that maybe there's none with a guy like Jon Rahm, who hit the ball immaculately at the Heritage, showed up for his commitment. And when asked, was there ever, Rahm at the Heritage after round 1 was like T85. Right. And then he shoots like 64 in round 2 when he could have easily taken a dive, gotten the weekend off. He did get a full rest week during Zurich Classic week. This is in a Spanish speaking country. In the past, he showed up to no-name events on the European tour during October to go play in Spanish speaking countries. So, there's, and I guarantee, I haven't seen if he even had a press conference today, but I guarantee if you ask Rahm a question, he'll look you straight dead in the face with like a dead eye stare and say, no, I'm here to win this tournament. Right. So I certainly understand it. I think if you are going to go in the direction of not playing Rahm or Finau, I don't think you should go for a 21% or a 17% Gary Woodland. Like I would rather you go in the direction of Hogard, Rogers, Wu, Griot, some of those other names in the single digits.
Yeah, I'm with you. If I'm like front running and out, like maybe I'd get to Gary Woodland, but Rogers, I think, is going to be used by myself a lot. Honestly, I'm a sucker for Luke List. At least I'll either have it over by the weekend or have I mean, I could make a case for so many of these guys, but it'll probably end up being Rogers. Yeah. Nikolai, maybe Luke List if I'm feeling frisky.
For us, did I make up any ground last week?
You did not. You lost ground. So we Burns both got both. So you had Burns and Horschel, 187,000. I used Bo and Wyndham.
Oh,
664, but it was not. Listen, I mean, for 3 days I thought they were going to win. I was going to get 2.4 million.
Right.
I got 660,000.
They were certainly right there. Okay, so that means, for example, you cannot hypothetically use Wyndham Clark this week.
It's not even a hypothetical. That is correct. I cannot use Wyndham Clark this week. Yes.
Okay. All right. Lead us off.
All right.
I'm curious where you go here.
I mean, my options are basically Finau or Gary Woodland, I think, and I don't think I'm going to use Finau, so I will use Gary Woodland.
You'll use Gary Woodland. Probably not going to bet this guy. Probably not going to use him in DraftKings or any of my bigger one and done pools. So this feels like the best time to just look at the model and do a pure numbers play and get some tiny bit of exposure to Wyndham Clark, just in case the numbers are correct and it really is that easy.
Yeah, right. If he's just like the third best player in this field and wins, sick. I probably will not bet Wyndham Clark, but I love this guy, dude. I mean, it was we followed him around in Phoenix for a while. He's been great. I hope he wins. But yeah, I don't know how much exposure I'll have to him.
And this is a good format for him too. Like if you're in smaller one and dones and stuff like that, like I would definitely endorse that. So still a fun week, still money to be made. And once we get through this week as well, it starts heating up pretty quickly. I mean, Oak Hill is going to be there before, right before we know it.
That's right. And we will talk a lot about Oak Hill. All right, that'll do it. Big thanks to producer Mina. She does all the hard work behind the scenes. Andy Lack is available on Twitter at ADP Lack Sports, and you can find me at RickRunGood. This has been your betting preview for this week's Mexico Open. Good luck.